Good morning, afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you all for attending today's webinar. My name is Chris Stevens. I'm a senior risk control consultant here at HII Group, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Topic today is the heat is on, how to prepare for summer. For those of you not familiar with HII Group is a family of companies that serves the public and affordable housing community with insurance programs as well as other value-added products and services. In the mid-1980s, there was a liability insurance crisis for the housing authorities in the U.S. Around that time, about 25 housing authorities leaders came together. I believe this is 1986 and formed our insurance company. We're a member-owned company, so you are our boss. Before we start today's presentation, I wanted to give you my contact information. Feel free to reach out and follow up with any questions that you may have during this session. Obviously, you can reach me through my phone. My extension is 207, and my email address is listed here on the slide. As I mentioned earlier, we do want your feedback. Before we dig into today's session, I want to remind you to provide, you can provide feedback later on. It'll just take a couple minutes. You can either use the QR code or the URL link to access the survey, and they're both posted here for you. Our learning outcomes and objectives for today's session are: one, we're going to discuss spring cleanup procedures and preparing for the summer season. Two, we're going to identify common exposures associated with summer season. And three, we're going to go over some methods to mitigate these risks. Keep in mind, you'll be able to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we'll try our best to get all these questions answered during the session. However, in the event that we run out of time, we'll be sure to follow up right after this webinar and with your answers. Spring cleanup. So your properties and buildings may need a little attention after the harsh winter weather. Spring's a great time to take a look at your sites and assess any damage that may have occurred over the past few months. This is also a great time to conduct property inspections since the weather is mild and you can really assess the condition of your properties now that the snow is gone. A few areas to note for exterior maintenance in regards to spring cleanup. You want to check your gutters for any areas that may be clogged. Also examine your gutters for any cracked or leaking. Excuse me. You want to make sure that downspouts are draining away from the building. Keep in mind, poor drainage can lead to weakened foundations and or flooding. You're going to want to inspect your roofs and note any damaged areas. Take a look at the surfacing, shingles, flashing, vents, and you're going to want to remove any debris and trim back any overhanging branches. Take this time to also examine your outdoor hose faucets for winter damage. You can do this by turning the water on and letting it run for a few minutes. If you aren't getting much water, then this could be a sign that you've sustained damage to the pipes inside the building. Either way, it's something that would need additional, more follow-up on that. You want to inspect for any damage to the exterior of the buildings, such as any rotted wood or missing siding. Keep in mind, rotted fascias and soffits, any missing shingles, this could lead to water intrusion and drastically diminish the lifespan of your building itself, the roof, and cause additional damages inside. Spring's also a good time to power wash your buildings. Not only will this help maintain a curb appeal, but you'll get a better look at the building and the foundation themselves. And this could help you identify other problem areas. This is a good time to go through and inspect all exterior lighting. Replace bulbs and submit work orders for any repairs that you have noted. You're also going to want to take the time, walk the premises, inspect any security fencing you have, look for any broken or down poles. Do you have any holes in the fencing? These are issues that need to be addressed and repaired. And again, you can set up a work order for that and get that taken care of. So winter weather, we also noticed it can wreak havoc on your sidewalks and our parking lots. The moisture from cold temperatures from winter can cause concretes to crack. So spring is a common time to assess the condition of your walking surfaces and identify any uneven areas for repair. You're going to want to ground down these uneven edges, preventing trip hazards there. And depending on the damage, you might be able to seal most of the cracks yourself. If the damage is more extensive, you want to call in a professional to take care of that. Let's talk a little bit about interior maintenance. Here's some interior maintenance areas to consider during this time as well. You want to clean or replace your furnace filters. This is going to help with increasing its efficiency. You're going to want to test your air conditioning system if you have one. This is something you don't want to wait to the first hot day of the year to find out if they're working properly or not. It's also a good idea to check the caulking around all doors and windows. This will help with preventing moisture from getting inside the buildings. And this is also the perfect time to replace any torn or damaged window screens that your inspections have noted. And of course, you want to test your smoke and carbon monoxide detectors and replace any batteries if needed. Smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, this is something you want to set up a regular schedule for. You want to have dates determined. If you're doing this, generally a lot of people will do it the times that they change spring forward and spring back. If they're changing their clocks, they take out a good time to go ahead and change that. Either way, if you pick a date, just make sure that you're doing it consistently on those time periods so that all of your units can make sure that they have, they're probably working in condition, and then any dysfunctional units can be replaced and maintain your safety of the units themselves. We're now going to move on to discussing some common hazards that we see during the summer months. And we'll look at how you can protect your organization by controlling these exposures. Using the chat feature, what are some of the risks you face that are specific to the summer season? I'll give you guys a few minutes, a couple seconds here to weigh in on the ones, the exposures or risks that are specific to summer seasons. All right, great, guys. Thanks, everyone, for your inputs. We have a polling question here. We tend to see a lot of barbecue grills on properties, especially as the winter weather gets warmer. Using the polling tool in the meeting, answer the questions we have here on the screen. Do you allow barbecue grills on the property? Okay, so it looks like there's a decent number of organizations that do allow the residents to have grills on properties. This leads us right into the first summer exposure. So according to the National Fire Protection Agency, 9,000 home fires a year involve barbecue grills. So there's clearly a risk, a fire risk, which needs to be controlled. The easiest way to eliminate this hazard is through avoidance. Prohibiting grills from the property altogether is the ideal solution. However, we do recognize that this may not be ideal for all organizations. So if you choose to allow grills on the property, you must have a written and enforced policy in place. Your policy should include the following items. Choose a safe location to grill. They must be pulled at least 10 feet away from any building while in use. They should never be used on wood balconies, and they must be kept on a level surface. They should also be kept away from any overhanging branches. Good idea. These reminders, you must also be rules regarding the safe storage for propane tanks and the safe disposal of charcoal. Keep in mind that charcoal grills can continue to remain hot for hours after you've extinguished the flames. You want to make sure you remind your residents to grill outside only. Never use a grill in a closed space. This eliminates the risk of carbon dioxide buildup. And grills should also be cleaned regularly, removing any grease buildup. Playgrounds. Playgrounds are another liability exposure, especially if they're not adequately maintained. This is key. All playgrounds should be included in your preventative maintenance schedule and will likely require more frequent inspections during the spring and summer months. The condition of equipment should be inspected to ensure it is in good working order. Rules should be posted noting the hours of operation and general expectations so that any trespassing orders can be enforced. And fencing. Fencing itself should be provided or some other type of barrier to ensure the area is secure. If the playground is located next to a parking lot, it's important to have a barrier for protection. One of the most common issues we see with playgrounds is poor surfacing. We suggest having a rubberized surfacing material. However, wood chips, pea gravel, and sand are also acceptable, as long as they meet the minimum depth requirement that is maintained to prevent against head injuries. Keep in mind, grass is not an acceptable surface material as it does not provide adequate protection from falls. And surfacing should also be maintained and free from any tripping hazards. Tripping hazards, if you lay down weed barrier and you put your surface material on top of that through normal use and throughout the spring and winter thaw, you can see a lot of times if the surface material is worn down, weed barrier will pull up in between there and create a tripping hazard. So this is another reason why to maintain it, but also too, you can catch that during your inspections and get that taken care of. Let's talk about resident-owned playgrounds. These are typically a larger liability to the agency. This is because it is the resident's responsibility to maintain the playground. This leads to the playground being in poor and, deficient condition. Some agencies choose to prohibit resident-owned playgrounds equipment from their property because of this. Again, if you choose to allow them, keep in mind there must be a policy in place stating that it's the resident's responsibility to maintain the playground equipment. You should also document who has a playground, and they should be checked during all annual unit inspections. If playground equipment is noted in poor condition, it should be removed right away. The policy can also require residents to obtain renter's insurance and may also state that your organization is not liable for any injuries or issues that may arise from the use of the playground. However, keep in mind, because you are allowing a resident to have a playground on the property, you're more than likely still going to have some issues with regarding to liability. You could get pulled into that. So with warmer weather, this also means an increased use of window air conditioning units. It's really important that these units are installed correctly to eliminate proper damage or liability. Again, there should be a policy in place to outline guidelines and safety precautions to follow to limit any issues. It should be established if residents are allowed to install these on their own or if it must be done by your maintenance staff. Regardless of your process, the policy should include if management approval is required prior to installing the unit. You want to be clear about that. And it's always a good idea to have manager approval to require that prior to installation of the units. Prior to installing the unit, here's a few items that must be met. You want to make sure that the electrical service within the unit can tolerate the requirements of the air conditioner. Consider the cooling capacity for the best efficiency and effectiveness. You're going to want to use a unit that has a BTU level designed to fit the space. If you're allowing residents to install these units on their own, we recommend following up with an inspection to ensure they were installed properly. If they were not installed correctly, it can lead to water and property damage. And it could also be a liability issue if the unit is not securely installed in the window and falls and injures someone walking by. And lastly, consider imposing penalties or fines for residents not complying with the policy. Before we move on to the next exposure, we have another polling question on the screen here. So please take a few minutes to answer this question. Do you allow water recreation at your property, such as splash pads or kiddie pools? Okay, thank you very much for your results. Looks like we're going to have, we're going to move in here to pools. Swimming pools, they're a liability to your agency, and ideally they should be prohibited to eliminate this potential risk. However, we do understand that some organizations allow for small kiddie pools, especially in areas with warmer climates. But we strongly recommend developing and enforcing swimming pool policies that outline guidelines and rules for these resident-owned pools and for our residents to follow. Some items that the policy can include are: residents must first obtain written approval from management. There should be restrictions on the size of the pool allowed. Obviously, you don't want to prohibit any full-size above-ground pools. The policy should state that pools must be used under the constant supervision of an adult, and they must be emptied after each use and stored in a secure location at the end of each day. And then also, pools should never be used during severe weather conditions. So we talked about swimming pools, but there's other water activity that we've seen over the years. Our splash pads. Splash pads are water features that shoot water up from spouts in the ground and are typically seen as safer options than swimming pools. However, it's important to realize that splash pads can be a breeding ground for bacteria and also result in illnesses. The reason for that is because the water used for today's splash pads is recirculated through an underground source where it's filtered, chlorinated, and pumped back out. However, not all bacteria and germs are killed off during this process. So just a few things to note if you have a splash pad on your property or you're considering installing one. Chlorine levels have to be maintained by a qualified staff member or contractor. The area should be inspected on a regular basis and checked for clogged drains. Ensure proper water pressure for the spray features. You don't want the pressure to be too high, especially since it is typically younger children that are going to be using these splash pads. So just be mindful of the water pressure on that and the occupants using it. And the area must be monitored to ensure there is not excessive water buildup on the ground. This could lead to slippery conditions and potential for slip and fall hazards. If the splash pad has been contaminated, there's a couple of things to follow. One, everyone must leave the area to prevent against the spread of bacteria. The entire system must be drained, and you will have to clean and disinfect the area. And then make sure all features are working correctly before opening up again to your residents. So again, if you do have a splash pad or you're considering installing one, here are the examples of rules that should be followed. Adult supervision required during all times of use since water is involved. No one should be using the splash pad if they have any open wounds or if they experience any illnesses or symptoms. Advise everyone never to touch the water spouts or swallow the water. Again, this will help you with preventing the spread of bacteria. Rough play or any other inappropriate behavior should be strongly discouraged. And also, no food and drink should be allowed in the area. The last exposure I wanted to discuss is bounce houses. These are another big liability for our agency, and we strongly discourage the presence of them on your property. While these are manufactured with safety in mind, the installations are not always inspected and well regulated. And actually, not all states even require a certificate of inspection before operating bounce houses. Accidents will usually involve falls and other injuries. Can be as severe as much as broken bones or sprains. And strong winds coupled with poor anchoring can also result in either the structure collapsing or becoming airborne, which of course can cause serious, even fatal accidents. As an example of this, there was an incident a few years ago in the news in New York where the wind lifted a bounce house 100 feet up in the air and injured 2 young boys after they fell into a parked car and onto the asphalt. There was another incident in Washington involving a generator that was used to pump air into the bounce house that stopped working, and the structure quickly deflated, leaving 3 small children trapped under the heavy weight of the rubber and vinyl. Although we advise against it, we have seen some organizations partner with local or community groups and provide a bounce house for an event. If you find yourself in this situation, it's important to communicate with the vendor the following information. You should be requesting records of all past accidents. If they tell you they've not had any accidents, be suspicious. Small accidents like bumps, bruises, or sprains are common with a group of younger children, and they are required to document these. Check to make sure that they are following adequate guidelines and that they have their equipment inspected to ensure it is working properly. Also, it might be a good idea to make a note of the last inspection date. Ideally, you want to see someone that is inspecting it before they put it up and when they take it down. Again, when they take it down there. Be sure there's a written contract in place between your organization and the vendor. The contract itself should include home harmless agreements and indemnification language to ensure that you are not held liable for any incidences arising out of their wrongdoing with the use of the bounce house. Please make sure that the supplier also carries their own liability insurance, that the limits are adequate, and provide you with a copy of their certificate of insurance as well. You also want to make sure you get a certificate of insurance well before the event. Large events can also create additional exposures that our members need to be aware of. Such things as, is there a need for additional security? Oftentimes you can work with your local police as they generally know your properties and can provide valuable insight to assist you with making sure your event is a success. So ask them, what do they recommend? Additional parking. Do you have adequate parking? Do you have signage, and is there a need for any traffic control? Keep in mind how far away is parking from the actual event. This is important, particularly if the majority of your participants are older and may possess disabilities. Restrooms. Is there a need to bring porta potties on site? Or will you have enough facilities at the building? First aid stations or cooling stations. Look at how you're going to protect your participants from severe weather, heat, sun, rain, wind. Are you providing tents or shade canopies? These are things that with tents you want to make sure they're securely secured and that the guidelines are clearly marked. We'll take a look at what type of activities are going to be, what type of activities are going to be performed outdoors. Do you have enough space to safely perform these activities? Do any of the activities or exhibits involve animals? Keep in mind, this is an additional exposure, and you'll want to make sure that they are adequately insured. Don't assume that because of the animals are part of an exhibit that they are trained or have received anything. Generally, they are wild animals. Treat them as such. So you want to make sure the exhibitor or vendor has adequate insurance to cover that in the event that some sort of accident should rise. Also, we look at volunteers. If volunteers are used, make sure that they or the organization providing the volunteers provides proof of workers' compensation. You want to be able to address how they obtain care if injured during the event. Background checks should be conducted on all persons working with children. And certificates of insurance. This is actually a repeat of slide 25, but I cannot stress the importance of this. You want to review all certificates to be sure that they have adequate levels of insurance, that they contain proper hold harmless and indemnification agreements. Therefore, you will be able to protect your organization in the event of an incident arising. Equipment rentals. You want to ask yourself, who's responsible for setting up and breaking down the equipment? I touched on this earlier. Tents or any high-profile equipment should be properly staked down. And any guide wires should also be marked, whether it be a red ribbon or whatever, to prevent pedestrians from walking into there or getting close line, so to speak, with that. By doing this, you'll be able to prevent against any high winds, as long as the tents and structures are properly staked down. It'll allow you to prevent against high winds, any microbursts from overturning or uprooting the structure. It's a good idea to assign someone to be on site and to monitor the event. This allows you to address any issues as they arise and make corrections if need be. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Some key areas we discussed include cleaning up your buildings and properties during the warmer spring months, identifying and mitigating against summer exposures, and protecting your employees and residents against heat-related illnesses and injuries, and preparing your properties for upcoming summer storms. And we talked about key points for planning on-site events. So you mentioned earlier in the presentation, we do want your feedback. We value your feedback. So I just wanted to remind you that you can provide your feedback. Just takes a couple minutes. You can either use the QR code listed here or the UL link to access our survey. Please feel free to submit any follow-up questions you may have, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. For any additional risk management tips, we ask that you visit the Risk Management Center at our website, www.housingcenter.com, where you can contact your risk control consultant, myself, or your account manager.